We are right in the middle of cabbage harvesting season here in the low desert, and I couldn't be happier. We love cabbage from the garden. And in today's video, I'm going to give you my best tips so you can grow cabbage too. I'm Angela from Growing in the Garden. I garden in Mesa, Arizona, Zone 9B. I love sharing garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your garden. Cabbage is one of those crops that has been grown for centuries and can be grown almost anywhere. Cabbage can be tricky to grow for the beginning gardener. So here are 10 tips for growing cabbage that will help you be successful. Planting at the right time is important for cabbage growing success. Cabbage is a cool season vegetable and will grow best during cool temperatures. If you live in a cold climate, typically you're going to grow cabbage in the spring and then plant again in the fall, working with your first and last frost dates as guidelines to when you plant. Here in the low desert and other mild winter climates, we typically grow cabbage through the winter months. So I'll start seeds indoors and then I'll plant transplants outside once those nighttime temperatures begin to go down in mid-September or so. My next tip is to try growing different varieties of cabbage. Depending on your climate, certain types may grow better where you live than others. So if you know you have a shorter growing season, it's always best to choose those shorter days to harvest, and you can find that information on your seed packet. You can also extend your growing season by growing different types of cabbages that are more tolerant of warm temperatures. Oriental and Savoy cabbage varieties are often more consistent producers here in the low desert and other warm climates. Head cabbage usually has green or red leaves and forms a tight rounded head. Early and mid-season varieties are smaller and faster growing. Late or long season varieties are larger and store well. So learn about the different varieties and see which one is best for your climate when you're planting. The next tip is to choose the best location when you're planting cabbage. So although cabbage is a cool season crop, it needs plenty of sunlight to grow well. It also needs rich, well-draining soil. Amend the soil with compost and nitrogen-rich blood meal or cottonseed meal before planting to encourage all the leafy growth. Cabbage can take a lot of space, and it's hard to give up that space in your garden for a crop that can take all of that cool season to develop. Look at the variety that you're growing and look at the mature size. Try and allow that much size in your garden. Companion planting is a great way to maximize the space in your garden when you're growing cabbage. I often grow a shorter season crop like beets or radishes between my cabbages, and then by the time that cabbage needs the extra space, those crops have been harvested and then there's more room for the cabbages. Your chances of being successful with cabbage increase if you can choose young, healthy, vigorous transplants rather than spindly or overgrown transplants that have been in their pots too long. Those plants that have been in their containers too long are more likely to bolt and flower instead of forming a head. When planting, bury the stem up to just below the first set of leaves. My next tip is to keep an eye out for some common pests that can affect cabbage. Usually it's the young transplants that are most susceptible to some of those pests. So if you can protect those plants when they're young, they'll be able to withstand pest pressure as older plants better than when they're younger plants. Insects such as cabbage worms or cutworms and snails can ruin young cabbage leaves. Aphids are a sign of water or heat stress. To help prevent soil-borne diseases, rotate where you plant cabbage each year. Use companion planting tactics like planting onions and radishes and nasturtiums near cabbage to help deter pests. Use row covers when the plants are young. Spray cabbage infected with caterpillars with BT. If aphids are a problem, spray off the aphids with water, and you may have to treat a couple of times a day for several days in order for this to be effective. Giving cabbage the right conditions of temperature will help prevent the plant from being stressed and attracting more pests and diseases. The next tip is to provide regular water for cabbage. It's one of those plants that just likes it slow and steady. It likes a regular supply of water. It doesn't like to dry out, but it doesn't like too much either. Something you can do that really helps with cabbage is to mulch, and that is going to keep the moisture levels more even and prevent that soil from drying out as much. Cabbage has all of these big leaves, and it's definitely a heavy feeder. Feed young plants with a fish emulsion and seaweed solution 2 weeks after planting, and then monthly throughout the growing season. Let's talk about when to harvest cabbage. How do you know the best time to harvest? You want to harvest before the temperatures heat up or get too cold. There's quite a big range depending on the variety of when cabbage is going to be ready. You want to look for a cabbage that's about softball size or larger. That cabbage should be well formed and firm. Harvest the head cabbage by cutting off the base with a sharp knife. If you want that second little crop and you have time for them to develop, leave the outer leaves in place, and then small Brussels sprout-like cabbages will form. I generally am ready to use that spot for something else. Don't waste those outer leaves. They can be tough to eat. I love collecting all of those outer leaves and freeze drying them, and then grinding them into a powder and using them in almost everything. It's a really simple way to use all of the excess greens with that cabbage. So now let's talk about how to store the cabbage. One of the big selling points for cabbage is how long it lasts in storage. It's one of those vegetables, if stored at proper conditions, can last for a really long time. You can store in a plastic vegetable bag in the fridge. Cabbage stored this way will last 3 to 4 weeks in the refrigerator. I've also freeze-dried entire heads of cabbage with pretty good success. You can definitely taste a difference between fresh and freeze-dried cabbage. Once it's freeze-dried and then reconstituted, you notice that cabbage flavor a little bit more, but that's a very easy way to preserve cabbage for up to 20 years. One of the most popular ways to preserve cabbage is by fermenting and making sauerkraut. We love using cabbage in slaw. We love it roasted, in soup, with cabbage rolls, stir fries, and more. Cabbage is a wonderful addition to any cool season garden. I hope you'll give it a try. Thank you so much for watching.